I stood in that marble mansion holding my daughter while they called her a fraud. His mother sneered, his fiancé laughed, and security waited to throw us out. But when that DNA envelope opened, every smug face in the room turned white. They wanted proof. I was about to give them a bloodline they couldn't deny. If you love stories where the truth comes out and karma hits hard, you're in the right place. Stick around until the end, because this twist will leave you speechless. And if you enjoy this story, smash that like button and subscribe, because you won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Lydia, and 3 years ago, I thought I'd found my fairy tale. Harrison Westbrook walked into the art gallery where I worked as a curator, and everything changed. He wasn't supposed to notice someone like me. I was the girl who wore the same black dress to every opening, who ate ramen 4 nights a week to afford my tiny studio apartment. He was the billionaire who owned half the tech companies you use every day. But for 3 months, none of that mattered. We'd meet at this little coffee shop in Brooklyn where nobody knew his name. He'd show up in a baseball cap and jeans, and we'd talk about everything except his money. He loved that I challenged him, that I didn't care about his net worth. I loved how he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. We'd walk through the city until 3 in the morning, and he'd kiss me under streetlights like we were the only 2 people alive. I was 28 and stupid enough to believe that love could bridge any gap. Then one Tuesday morning, he just vanished. No explanation, no goodbye, nothing. His number went straight to voicemail. His assistant, who used to put my calls through with a smile in her voice, suddenly couldn't find him. I was blocked on every platform. It was like I'd imagined the whole thing, except I hadn't. Because 2 weeks after he disappeared, I was staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test in my bathroom, and the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. I tried everything to reach him. I went to his office building, and security escorted me out. I sent letters that were returned unopened. I left messages that were never answered. After a month, I got the message loud and clear. Harrison Westbrook had decided I didn't exist, and neither did our baby. So I made a choice. I would raise this child alone, with dignity, and I would never beg him for anything. Indy came into the world on a rainy October morning, and the moment I held her, everything made sense. She had his dark curly hair and those same green eyes that had made me fall in love. Every time I looked at her, I saw him, but I also saw me. I saw strength. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Mornings at a coffee shop, nights doing freelance design work while she slept. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment where I'd converted the closet into her nursery. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and we were happy. For 18 months, I convinced myself that we didn't need him, that his money and his world meant nothing compared to the life we'd built. But then I saw his face on the news. Harrison Westbrook announces engagement to society heiress Vivian Ashford. She was everything I wasn't. Old money, perfect pedigree, the kind of woman who wore diamonds to brunch. And something inside me cracked. Not for me. I was over him, but for Indy. She deserved to know her father. She deserved the opportunities that came with being a Westbrook. So I did something crazy. I looked up the address of the family estate. I dressed my daughter in her best outfit, and I drove to Connecticut with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The Westbrook mansion wasn't a house, it was a statement. All glass and steel and money, sitting on 20 acres like a modern palace. I had to argue with the security guard at the gate for 10 minutes before he made a call and reluctantly let me through. As I walked up those marble steps with Indy on my hip, I felt like I was walking into enemy territory. I was. The door opened, and I stepped into a nightmare. Harrison was there, but he wasn't alone. His mother, Claudette, stood like a sentinel in a cream designer suit, her face already set in disgust before I'd even spoken. Vivian, his fiancée, draped herself on a white sofa, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. And there was a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Sterling, the family attorney. They'd been waiting for me. Harrison's assistant had tipped them off, and they'd prepared an ambush. Harrison wouldn't even look at me. The man who'd whispered he loved me under Brooklyn's streetlights stood there like I was a stranger. That hurt worse than anything else. But I held Indy tighter and reminded myself why I was there. Claudette struck first. "How much do you want?" She said it like she was discussing a business transaction, not her own granddaughter's future. "Name your price to disappear and stop this embarrassing charade." Vivian laughed, actually laughed, and made some comment about my shoes being from Target. She wasn't wrong, but the cruelty in her voice made Indy whimper against my shoulder. I tried to speak calmly. I explained that I wasn't there for money. I was there because Indy deserved to know her father, deserved her inheritance, deserved her place in this family. But they talked over me like I was nothing. Claudette called my daughter "that child" and suggested I was running some kind of scam. Vivian threw around the word "gold digger" like she was tossing confetti, and Harrison just stood there, silent, refusing to even acknowledge his own daughter. Then Sterling opened his briefcase and pulled out what he called evidence. Documents showing Harrison was supposedly out of the country during the time Indy was conceived. It was a lie, and we both knew it, but they were so confident in their deception. He even suggested I'd done this before to other wealthy men, which was so absurd I almost laughed. Except Indy was crying now, sensing the tension. And nothing about this was funny. Claudette delivered the final blow with theatrical precision. "That baby," she said, pointing at my daughter like she was contaminated, "is not family." Vivian clapped her hands together like this was all very entertaining, and I felt something inside me turn to steel. I looked at Harrison then, really looked at him, and I saw the coward he'd become. "Then let's do a DNA test," I said quietly. "Right now." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive marble floor. Harrison's face went pale. Claudette's mouth fell open. Even Sterling looked uncomfortable. Harrison finally spoke, and his voice was weak. "This is ridiculous. I don't need to prove anything." But I was ready for this. I reached into my bag and pulled out a home DNA test kit I'd bought that morning. "Scared of what it might say?" I asked him, and I watched him flinch. Claudette tried to shut it down, started talking about propriety and privacy, but Vivian was too arrogant for her own good. "Do it," she announced, standing up like she was pronouncing judgment. "Let's expose this fraud once and for all." She was so confident, so sure I was lying. Sterling tried to warn them. You could see it in his eyes. But Vivian was insistent, and Harrison was trapped, with his fiancée and his mother watching. He couldn't refuse without looking guilty. The test was administered right there in that cold, perfect living room. A cheek swab for Harrison, one for Indy, who was still crying and didn't understand why these people were being mean to her mommy. They'd send it to the lab with rush processing. 48 hours, Sterling said. Then we'd know the truth. Security escorted us out like we were criminals, but I held my head high. I'd given them exactly what they asked for. The truth was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. Those 2 days were the longest of my life. I barely slept. Doubt crept in during the dark hours. What if they tampered with the results? What if money could buy even scientific truth? My best friend Tessa came over and held my hand and told me to have faith. But faith was hard when you were going up against billionaires. On the second day, Sterling called. They wanted me back at the mansion. I dressed Indy in her nicest dress, the yellow one with flowers that made her look like sunshine. I knew this moment would change everything. I just didn't know if it would change it for better or worse. Walking back into that mansion felt different. The energy had shifted. Claudette was pacing. Her perfect composure cracked. Vivian was checking her phone obsessively, her confidence less certain. Harrison looked like he hadn't slept either, and for the first time, he looked at Indy when we walked in. Really looked at her. I saw something flicker in his face. Fear? Recognition? I couldn't tell. Sterling held a sealed envelope in his hands like it was a bomb. The room was silent, except for Claudette's heels clicking on the marble floor. "Well?" I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Read it out loud." Sterling hesitated. He looked at Claudette, and I knew in that moment what the results said. He opened the envelope, read it silently, and his professional mask slipped. Shock, pure shock. Claudette snatched it from his hands, read it herself, and the color drained from her face. Vivian grabbed it next, and her hands started trembling. Finally, Harrison took it, and he actually stumbled backward, grabbing the sofa for support. The results showed 99.9% probability that Harrison was Indy's biological father. The truth, printed in black and white, undeniable, and absolute. The room exploded. Vivian started screaming at Harrison, called him every name you can imagine. She ripped off her engagement ring and threw it at him, and it bounced off his chest and skittered across the floor. Claudette tried to take control, started talking about handling this quietly, managing the press, protecting the family reputation, but her voice was shaking. Harrison just stared at the paper in his hands. Then he looked at Indy, really looked at her for the first time, and I watched realization wash over his face. She had his eyes, his nose, his smile. You couldn't miss it once you were looking for it. "That baby you said wasn't family," I said softly. "She's a Westbrook. She always was." Vivian created a scene that would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. She screamed about betrayal and lies, threw a very expensive vase against the wall, and stormed out threatening to tell everyone what kind of man Harrison really was. Good riddance. Claudette immediately shifted into damage control mode, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to keep it quiet. Then she turned to me with that calculating look and made an offer. Money, a lot of it, to keep my mouth shut, to sign NDAs, to make this all go away quietly. She thought everything had a price, including the truth. I looked at her holding my daughter, this woman who'd called us frauds and tried to destroy us, and I said no. "I'm not here for your money. I'm here for my daughter's rights. She's your granddaughter whether you like it or not." That's when Harrison finally broke. He sank into a chair and put his head in his hands, and when he looked up, there were actual tears in his eyes. He admitted everything. How his mother had run a background check on me after our first month together. How Claudette had declared me unsuitable, too poor, too common, wrong breeding. How she'd given him an ultimatum, and he'd chosen family approval over love. How he'd been too much of a coward to face me, so he'd just disappeared and tried to pretend I'd never existed. It was pathetic, but it was also honest, maybe the first honest thing he'd said in years. He reached for Indy then, tried to touch her hand, and I pulled her back. "You don't get to be her father just because a test says so," I told him. "You have to earn that right. And right now, you haven't earned anything." I left them there in their broken mansion with their broken plans and their shattered illusions. But this time, I left with power. The truth was out, and they couldn't put it back in the box. Of course, it leaked. Vivian made sure of that. Hell hath no fury like a society heiress scorned. She sold the story to every tabloid and gossip site she could find. Within 24 hours, the internet exploded. Billionaire's secret love child, Harrison Westbrook's hidden daughter. The Westbrook family, who'd built their reputation on perfection and propriety, was suddenly the subject of scandal. Claudette was humiliated in her country club. Harrison faced public criticism and lost business deals. Karma was working overtime. Sterling called me 3 days later with a formal proposal. The Westbrook family wanted to make this right, he said, though we both knew they just wanted to control the narrative. They offered full financial support for Indy, a trust fund that would set her up for life, the best schools, healthcare, everything. Legal recognition as Harrison's heir with all the rights that came with it. Child support backdated to her birth. It was everything I should have wanted, but I added my own terms. Harrison had to attend co-parenting therapy with me, supervised visitation, until he proved he was serious about being a father. Public acknowledgement of Indy, no hiding her away like a dirty secret, and Claudette was not allowed unsupervised access to my daughter until she could treat us with basic human respect. Sterling looked uncomfortable, but he agreed to present the terms. They accepted everything. They didn't have a choice. The court of public opinion was already against them, and fighting me would only make it worse. So we signed papers, established custody arrangements, and began the slow, awkward process of becoming something like a family. 6 months later, everything had changed. Harrison actually showed up to therapy. He was terrible at it at first, defensive and uncomfortable, but he kept coming. He started with supervised visits, bringing age-appropriate toys that showed he'd actually researched what 2-year-olds liked. He learned her favorite songs and would sing them off-key until she giggled. He read her stories and learned that she only ate chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. I watched from a distance as he slowly, painfully, became a real father. Not the fairy tale prince I'd once imagined, but a flawed man trying to fix his mistakes. Indy started to warm to him, would reach for him when he arrived, started calling him Dada. And I had to admit, watching them together, that she deserved this. She deserved a father who showed up. Claudette sent a formal apology through her lawyers. It was stiff and proper, and probably written by Sterling, but it was something. She asked if she could meet Indy under supervision, and I said yes. That first meeting was awkward as hell, but Claudette held my daughter like she was made of glass and cried. Real tears. Maybe there was a human being under all that ice after all. Vivian's engagement to some European duke was announced with great fanfare. She looked happy in the photos, or at least vindicated. She'd moved on to someone with a better pedigree and no secret children. Good for her, honestly. Karma had been served on all fronts. The mansion that once rejected us now had a room with Indy's name on the door, pink walls and a princess bed, and more toys than any child needed. Harrison insisted on it. I didn't fight him. This was part of her heritage, part of her story. She could decide when she was older what it all meant to her. Last month was Indy's 2nd birthday. Harrison insisted on throwing a party at the estate. I almost said no, but then I thought about what I'd fought for. I'd fought for my daughter to be recognized, to have her place in this family. So I said yes. I stood in the garden of that massive estate, watching Harrison hold our daughter while she blew out candles on a cake that probably cost more than my rent. The same people who'd called her a fraud were now cooing over her, bringing presents, treating her like the Westbrook princess she was. Claudette was directing caterers and actually smiled at me. Not warmly, but it was progress. Harrison caught my eye across the lawn and mouthed, "Thank you," and I nodded. Not because I forgave him for abandoning us, but because he was trying. He was showing up. That was all I'd ever asked for. I thought about that day I'd walked into this mansion, terrified and alone, holding my baby while they called us liars. I thought about Claudette's sneer and Vivian's laughter, and how sure they'd been that we were nothing. And I thought about that DNA test, that piece of paper that changed everything. They'd wanted proof. They'd demanded it, so confident in their lies. And I'd given them exactly what they asked for. The truth. Undeniable, scientific, absolute truth. My daughter was a Westbrook, and no amount of money or power or snobbery could change that fact. Standing there watching Indy's party, surrounded by people who'd once tried to erase us, I realized something. I didn't get my fairy tale. Harrison and I weren't going to ride off into the sunset together, but I got something better. I got respect. I got security for my daughter. I got justice. They'd said she wasn't family. They'd said I was a fraud, a gold digger, a liar. They'd tried to pay me off, shut me up, make us disappear. But we didn't disappear. We stood our ground, demanded the truth, and watched their perfect world crack open. Now my daughter sleeps in a mansion with her name on the door. She has a trust fund, and a father who's learning to love her, and a grandmother who's trying to make amends. She has everything that's rightfully hers, everything they tried to deny her. And every time they look at her, they remember that they were wrong. They remember that bloodline doesn't lie, that truth always comes out, and that karma is very, very real. So that's how a DNA test brought a billionaire empire to its knees and gave my daughter the life she deserved. They wanted proof. They got a bloodline they couldn't deny. If this story hit you in the feels, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life karma stories. Drop a comment below and tell me if you would have done the same thing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.